right? And in particular, I actually, and I don't know if you want to get into it right now, but like I actually think that naming is an extremely profound process that is so intuitive to us that it seems trivial, but in fact underpins essentially all of humanity in some sense, right? And I think different authors and in religious traditions, in the both Bible and Quran actually.
By who?
Bible and Quran.
Oh, Bible and Quran.
Both indicate that one of the first things that happened was God created Adam and taught him the names of things. Right. And so there is this insight, and then Ursula K. Le Guin in her Wizard of Earthsea series. I don't know if we ever talked about this.
No.
So she wrote a series of books set in a fictional world of Earthsea, and there are wizards and whatever. But she's very clever. I mean, she's a brilliant writer in many ways. But in her system of magic, right, she actually says that what the wizards have to do, they have to have some innate talent for magic. But combined with that talent, they have to go learn the names of things in order to gain mastery by magic over them. And the name can't be the common name. It has to be the name that God called it when he created it, right? So there is some original name for that thing, right? And actually, and she gives this example is that, you can't just command the ocean because in fact, if you talk about, for instance, the Atlantic Ocean, well, but the Gulf of Mexico also has a name, right? And so in fact, when you say Atlantic Ocean, what you mean is Atlantic Ocean except the Gulf of Mexico. And it's not even that, it's like all these other exceptions. So if you were to try to command all the water in the world, you would have to individually name each and every sort of body, which is an interesting framework of magic, right? But it also encapsulates something really fascinating, because where does the Gulf of Mexico end? Right. That's somewhat arbitrary, right? Like, when does that become the Atlantic and when does it not? Right. And so if you were in this fictional world and you were a wizard and you were going to command the Gulf of Mexico, right? Not that there's the Gulf of Mexico in the world, but, but this thing, then you say, okay, Gulf of Mexico, waters be still, or whatever, right? Which waters would be still? That's an interesting question, right? And it is that kind of thing. It gets into all these ideas of what is blue, what is red, like where are the edges of blue? When does it become green? Right. All of these things is the process of naming is picking out or labeling something in the context of continua. Right. Right. And so the odd thing is we get in such a habit of it that we think the thing is in the world when it's not. It's actually just continua, and we happen to find it useful to sort of talk about that set of atoms, right? That bowl over there. That set of atoms is useful enough that we come up with the label bowl for things that are shaped that way, right? And therefore I'm able to pick it out, and it's so intuitive to you that we don't question it, but it's actually quite odd. And so, yeah, I think that idea of naming, I'm just eager to see you also kind of go through that evolution of and that really is the sort of the beginnings of philosophy in some senses, is the process of questioning the obvious, right? The things that are so obvious you've never thought to question them, and then when you do, you're like, well, maybe that's not obvious at all. It seems obvious because we're all doing it without problem, right? And none of us struggle with, why is that a bowl? None of it, like, if I say bowl, you're not like, what?
Yeah, right.
And yet it is not obvious when you really dive into it as to exactly how that naming process works. If you consider a statue, where does the statue end and the air around it begin? Right? And you can say, well, the statue is made of certain molecules or certain types of atoms, right? Though if you get far enough down, it's all the same quarks, right? And electrons, so that's also a little bit murky, right? It's all probability clouds that are intersecting with each other. So that even gets murkier. Maybe, and you could say, well, maybe it's the density of collection of the probability clouds, right? But if you put a statue on a marble stand made of the same thing, right? Well, the density is the same, right? And so now, how do you differentiate the one from the other, right? And you know, even this bowl and the table. I mean, on an electrical level, you know, they're being held apart by the repulsion of the electrons between them. But that means the electrons are incredibly close together, and perhaps equally close, depending on the setup, as the electrons within the substance itself, right? You could take other examples, right? You know, we've named the solar system, right? But on what basis, right? Like, that is a thing because we have named it so. And yet, does it include Planet X or not? Does it include Pluto or not? Does it, you know, and what are the edges of the solar system? And, you know, I mean, it's mostly space, just like an atom is, right? So we name an atom as a thing, but it's mostly empty, right?
Yeah. So
Even without time, you end up with these odd questions about how are we telling where the statue ends, right? How is that a thing, right? And I've made the argument, and this is why I think naming is profound, is that we name the statue a thing because it is useful to us in some way to pick out that set of atoms. It doesn't actually exist in the universe. It's just an undifferentiated mass of matter at differing densities. And there are no things, right? It's a continuum. But out of that continuum, purely for our own usefulness, we start picking these things out. Or so even without time,
labeling is artificial abstraction.
Yep.
Right, and that's just useful. Yeah. So I mean, Heraclides never, you know, I don't think he got into the boundary of things, right?
Correct.
He just sort of said,
it's
not a thing because, you know, time just moves forward and it doesn't really think about it very much.
Yeah, his was mostly change based.
Yeah,
right. He was saying that, as far as I understand, that the thing is not constant because it is constantly changing, which is over time, right? Whereas this is a different abstraction: is the thing may not be the thing because it's a massive. Why is the statue not considered in terms of its sole orbit around the sun in some sense?
Yeah, or rather, the thing that you just labeled has been snatched by the arrow of time into the next instant. You know, so. In a sense, you know, that thing you've just labeled has disappeared, you know.
Well, that would be Heraclitus's.
Right.
Yeah.
Heraclitus.
Yeah, I was talking about, so the other view is a different one, right?
And
again, rightfully so on some level. This actually gets back a conversation we had before when we were walking, first of all, but second of all, and I'll pull that in as well, but exactly what we've been talking about, the idea of naming, right? And this is, again, a layer of abstraction, right? Giving something a name, And what we were talked about is, you know, there are these sort of remote villages that were untouched by modernity, and if you ask them to sort cloth into their different colors, they couldn't do it because each color was considered individual.
Right.
And so they couldn't say, well, this is a shade of red. This is its own color and has to be put in its own basket because, right? And similarly, they were like that for everyday objects. Is like they're you know. The idea of sorting or abstracting was not there. Each object is in itself, right? There isn't. So, you know, the other example I gave is said, hey, all the bears in the north are white. So if you went up to the north and you saw a bear, what color would it be? They were unwilling to say. They said, I haven't been there. How could I possibly say what color that bear is until I have seen it? It's a very concrete way of approaching the world, right? And so that was just 1940. Like that's not, you know, that's not thousands of years ago, right? The modern level of abstraction is actually extremely new, and along with that is this idea of abstracting. Again, I think this is a profound. It's so common to us that it's hard to realize, but the idea of abstracting to the number 2 is actually incredibly non-obvious.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Because why is it that there's not just one of everything? Because in some sense, each object is unique. So it's actually a perfectly reasonable way to look at the world that there's only the number one, right? And if something doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. So there's no zero.
Right.
It's just one. Like,
I see.
so any number other than one is actually somewhat non-obvious, right? Because the idea of two is the idea of grouping.
Right.
There's enough similarity between these things. I'm going to now, create a superordinate category in my mind to which both of these things belong. And then I'm going to start operating with that category as if it's a thing in itself, right? So rather than just the left bowl and the right bowl, now I have the concept of bowls, and I'm going to start making statements about the nature of bowls and what a bowl is and what it's not.
So do you think animals are, they have to be capable of this kind of abstraction as well? I mean, they have to be. They may not have.
About it. I don't know.
I mean, so take, for example, a chimpanzee, right? A primate. They're going to, recognize a banana, right? So they see one banana. And then, a week later, they see another banana. They group that in their mind like, oh, this is that thing that if I eat, I'll do well with. So animals must be able to do this. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you can also,
so that raises an interesting question: is if you don't have a language for that abstraction, is it equally profound?
No, that's an interesting question. Yeah.